Well, good evening, everyone. Oh, isn't that nice? And thank you all for joining us. This is a full house we have in person, and we also have quite a large group joining us by Zoom. And I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. My pronouns are she and her. And as we begin, I always like to take a moment to gratefully acknowledge the Nacotch tank, also documented as the Anacostan, the Piscataway, and the Pamunkey. Now, these are the native peoples on whose ancestral lands Hillwood stands. And, of course, the diverse native community who makes their home near us today. So we are so pleased to have audiences joining us for tonight's program from here in the theater, as well as many who are attending remotely. Those of you in the theater, I think you know what I'm going to say now. Have you all turned off your phones? Very important. Don't want to have those dogs barking in the middle of the presentation. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And for those joining us by Zoom, you can make yourselves comfortable. Your cameras are not active, neither are your microphones, but you may submit your questions in the Q&A module on the Zoom menu as they occur to you, and we'll get to as many of them as we can, both here in the room and by Zoom at the end of the program. So tonight we're going to be delving into the extraordinary experiences of influential women who are featured in Hillwood's collection that was, of course, amassed by our founder, Marjorie Merriweather Post. And they're featured in our current exhibition, Determined Women, Collectors, Artists, and Designers at Hillwood. Now, I hope many of you have seen the show already. It explores the imaginative and intrepid women who set an example for Post and for future women by making a place for themselves and overcoming obstacles through their determination to succeed. Determined Women is on view until June 18th, so please go if you haven't been there already. And if you have, you can go again. There's a lot to see. Now, in April, maybe you know this, in April, our Dinner Time documentary series returns for the first time since 2019. So it'll be on 3 succeeding Wednesdays, I think it is. It's the 12th, the 19th, and the 26th. And we will show 3 films about determined women. The first one is A Ballerina's Tale, which features the life and story of Misty Copeland. The second is Yellow is Forbidden, which showcases the successes and hardships of Chinese fashion designer Guo Pei, and Peggy Guggenheim, Art Addict, a film exploring that iconic collector. So you may know you can make a dinner reservation at Merriweather Cafe. They have specially curated menus on those evenings, and then see a movie. It's a really kind of magical evening at Hillwood, so don't miss them. We also have several upcoming horticultural events, guided forest bathing walks throughout April and May, gardeners' focus tours showcasing Hillwood's beautiful spring plant displays, and a virtual floral design workshop with Amy Wilbur on April 14th. So you can visit our website to learn about all of these. We have a lot of very rich offerings at hillwoodmuseum.org. And there may be 1 or 2 of you who are not yet Hillwood members. Now you need to become members. That's just a requirement. And that then you can enjoy your benefits both this season and then all year long. So tonight, we're very excited to hear from our curators, Wilfried Zeisler and Megan Martinelli, and Jason Speck, our head of archives and special collections. So after the lecture, you can join us outside the theater for a book signing, The Houses and Collections of Marjorie Merriweather Post, The Joy of It, was written collaboratively by Wilfried, Megan, and Jason, and of course can be purchased from the museum shop upstairs. Jason Speck is head of Archives and Special Collections for Hillwood. Prior to coming to Hillwood in 2019, Jason spent 11 years at the University of Maryland College Park in a variety of archival and librarian roles, including assistant university archivist, collection development librarian, and supervisory manager for multiple special collection units. While at Maryland, Jason led the creation of several exhibitions, including University History, American Labor History, and the LGBTQ+ community at Maryland. In addition to publication in several professional journals, he also authored University of Maryland, A Pictorial History of the Institution. Since arriving at Hillwood, Jason has led the institutional transition of the library and archives into the new collections and research facility, which is, of course, underneath the parking lot. Jason's focus is on bringing to light the hidden stories and gems in the archives and special collections, and on utilizing the resources of his department for the benefit of the entire Hillwood community. Dr. Wilfried Zeisler is Hillwood's chief curator and deputy director. He is a graduate of the Sorbonne University and the École du Louvre in Paris. He's written extensively on French and Russian decorative arts, including several articles and contributions to books. Wilfried's dissertation on French objets d'art and luxury goods in Russia, 1881 to 1917, was published in Paris in 2014. Since 2009, he has participated in and curated exhibitions in Paris, Monaco, and Washington, D.C. At Hillwood, his most recent exhibitions were Fabergé Rediscovered, Balca de Vries War and Pieces, Natural Beauty's Exquisite Works of Minerals and Gems, and the Porcelain Flowers of Vladimir Kanevsky. He co-authored Konstantin Makovsky, the Tsar's Painter in America and Paris, and is the author of Fabergé Rediscovered and Vive la Belle Époque à Paris, Paul de Russie et Olga Pelli. He is currently working on a book exploring the connections between the Yusupovs and Parisian culture. Megan Martinelli joined Hillwood in January 2018 and is the associate curator of textiles, apparel, jewelry, and accessories. She was the lead curator for the 2019 special exhibition, Mid-Century Master, the photography of Alfred Eisenstadt, 2021's Roaring Twenties, the life and style of Marjorie Merriweather Post, and 2022's Grace of Monaco, Princess in Dior. Prior to coming to Hillwood, Megan was a research assistant at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute, where she assisted with exhibitions including China Through the Looking Glass and Manus Ex Machina, Fashion in the Age of Technology. Megan holds an MS in Historical Textiles and Costumes from the University of Rhode Island. Her research focuses on identity and expression through fashion and adornment. We will be hearing from all three of these wonderful people tonight, but up first, please join me in welcoming Jason Speck to the podium.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thank to all of you for coming tonight, and of course, thank you to those of you at home who can see me and I can't see you. I first have to start with a little bit of an apology on behalf of myself and the other speakers. I know it says 4 determined women, but we all sort of went over the limit we were given, so it's going to be more like 8 determined women. But on the plus side, you get twice as many determined women for half the price. So that should work out well for us. So tonight I want to talk about the lives of 3 very determined women whose memoirs and letters are some of the most important works documenting the lives of women in the period in which they lived. Both of the volumes that I'm going to speak about are in our special collections library, and they are currently on display on the second floor of the mansion as part of an extension of the exhibition that is in the dacha. The portrait that you see on the left is no doubt familiar to many of you. It is currently in the dacha as part of Hillwood's Determined Women exhibition. Painted in 1784 by Dmitry Levitsky, it reflects Princess Ekaterina Dashkova wearing the sash and star of the Order of St. Catherine, as well as her lady-in-waiting diamond-studded pin featuring a portrait of Catherine II. Princess Dashkova, upon her passing in 1810, willed the work to Martha Wilmot, who we'll talk about in just a few minutes. It was then purchased from Olivier Roussy by Joseph Davies, who gave it as a gift to Marjorie Post on Christmas Day of 1952. I think you can tell from the quote right there why I'm such a fan of Dashkova. Anybody who loves a book like that is somebody after my own heart. Princess Dashkova was born into the prominent Vorontsov family. Her father was a member of the Russian Senate. Her younger brother Semyon became Russia's ambassador to Great Britain for 20 years, and her older brother Alexander and her uncle Mikhail both shared the role of the diplomatic post of imperial chancellor. Dashkova received an excellent education at the University of Moscow, largely through the efforts of her uncle Mikhail. Her father was largely an absentee father. And in addition to her interests in mathematics and French literature, she also mastered 4 languages: Russian, French, Italian, and German. At the same time, she was also getting an education in the art of diplomacy, as her uncle Mikhail often allowed her to read his diplomatic correspondence. At the age of 16, 2 events occurred in early 1859 that would change her life forever. The first was her marriage to Prince Mikhail Dashkova, a member of the Imperial Guard with whom she would have 3 children. She also met and became very close to Grand Duchess Ekaterina Alexeyevna, the future Empress Catherine II. They also met and became very close. She was 15 and Catherine was 30. Their friendship intensified as the Grand Duchess's husband, Grand Duke Peter, became Emperor Paul III in 1761. And in 1962, at the age of 19, Princess Dashkova played a significant role in supporting the Grand Duchess in her coup that placed her on the throne. For her part in establishing Catherine on the throne, Dashkova received the Order of St. Catherine Medal, but all would not be well with the princess and the empress. Catherine began to claim in letters that Dashkova was taking too much credit for her role in the coup, and claimed her guilty of, and I'm quoting her now, excessive ostentation and a naturally quarrelsome disposition, which is a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black, I think. To make matters worse for Dashkova, her husband died prematurely of pneumonia in 1764, thereby leaving her with their 2 surviving children and a mountain of gambling debt. Under all of these pressures, she asked for and received a release from her duties at court, and in 1768 she departed for Europe on a 14-year journey. During this journey, she ventured to Paris, where she became great friends with the French philosophers Diderot and Voltaire, and she also met and charmed one Benjamin Franklin, who was so taken with her that he invited her to become the first female member of the American Philosophical Society, which was quite the honor, not just at its time, but also because she would then become the only female member of that society for the next 80 years. So she was truly remarkable. She spent 3 years in Edinburgh, Scotland, while her son obtained his education, and then she visited Ireland, where she stayed with Lady Catherine Hamilton, who would eventually become her link to the Wilmot sisters. In 1783, upon returning to Russia, Catherine made Dashkova the first woman to head an Academy of Sciences anywhere in the world. And in the same year, she also became the head of the Imperial Academy of Russian Language, launching a project to create a 6-volume dictionary of the Russian language. But of course, all things must change, and when Catherine passed in 1796, her son, Emperor Paul I, acceded to the throne, and he had a very long memory about what had happened to his father in 1762. And so she was exiled. And her friends petitioned the court to have her exile released, and a year later she was allowed to come back. And then she settled on her rural estate about 60 miles outside of Moscow. It was at Princess Dashkova's estate in 1803 that a fated meeting would occur with the arrival of Martha Wilmot, cousin of Lady Catherine Hamilton. Wilmot had chosen to go abroad in very similar circumstances to that of Dashkova, as Martha was mourning the untimely death of one of her brothers. After a strenuous 4-month journey, Martha arrived at Dashkova's estate, where the two immediately became very close. Dashkova treated Martha as an adopted daughter, often referring to her as Mavra Romanovna. Dashkova showered Wilmot with gifts, in part to keep the younger woman at her side for as long as possible, as Dashkova by that time had become estranged from both of her adult children. Martha realized what was happening, writing that she was, quote, a prisoner in the true sense of the word, though the prisoner of friendship. While in Russia, Wilmot kept a diary and wrote letters recording her observations of Russian life and the aristocracy, while encouraging Dashkova to write her memoirs. After Martha had been Dashkova's companion for 3 years, her older sister, Catherine Wilmot, was sent to bring her sister home. But rather than bring Martha home, Catherine ended up staying for 2 years herself. It was during this period that Dashkova's memoir was completed, with Martha transcribing it while Catherine translated it from French into English. In 1807, the sisters found themselves in a very delicate situation, as Dashkova's estranged daughter had started to believe that the two of them were trying to steal her inheritance, and she even went so far as to confront the sisters at her own brother's funeral. And so at this point, the Wilmot sisters said, well, it's probably time to go. Catherine departed in 1807. She took a copy of Dashkova's memoirs with her. She survived a shipwreck. Hold on to that thought, because that's going to become a theme in a minute. And she returned to Ireland in 1807. Martha tried to leave in early 1808, but at the last minute she had a change of heart and went back to Dashkova, which was lucky for her because the ship that she would have taken sank, and also there were very few survivors. However, by the latter part of 1808, Russia and England were in conflict with each other, primarily because of a treaty that Russia had signed with France, and so Martha really did have to leave the country. However, when she attempted to leave the country in 1808, she was stopped by customs officials who believed that she was carrying secret documents, and during the period that she was detained, she chose to destroy her copy of the memoir, as well as some original letters between the Empress and the Princess. She was able to leave in the fall of 1808, where she suffered a shipwreck. And was at one point stranded on a small island off the coast of Finland for an entire month before she was finally able to make it home. While she returned to Ireland in 1809, she withheld the publication of Dashkova's memoir for over 3 decades. This was in part due to the fierce opposition by Dashkova's brother Semyon, who I mentioned earlier, who was very concerned about any kind of negative impacts on him and the family, Dashkova and, of course, the Empress Catherine having sort of fallen out of favor and become a topic that no one really wanted to talk about. The other reason why it would not have been published, certainly not in Russia during that period, is that memoirs and autobiographies were not considered an acceptable type of publication due to social conventions of the period that saw them as unbridled egotism. So when you combine that with state censorship, the lack of education for women, and the modesty imposed on them by society, it comes as no surprise that Dashkova's memoirs are notable for their mere existence alone, as well as for their content. By the time of their publication, Martha had become Mrs. William Bradford, a minister who would later become the chaplain at the British Embassy in Vienna. Despite vowing to do so, Martha was never able to return to see Dashkova, for the princess passed away in 1810. Dashkova's memoirs are recognized as one of the most important firsthand documents of the lives of women during that particular period of time, and actually beat Empress Catherine's memoirs to press by almost 20 years. Catherine's not being published until 1759. Martha eventually traveled to Italy, where she kept a diary there, and she kept a diary, wrote letters. That was also eventually published as well. And she settled back in Ireland in 1857, where she would stay until she passed away. Her sister Catherine, who of course was the one who managed to make it out of Russia with the Deshkova's memoir intact, was also a great traveler in her own right. And while she was in France, she met Napoleon, she met Pope Pius VII, and she met as many people as her sister Martha did. She stayed in France due to health conditions, and she passed away in 1824, so quite a bit before her sister did. And unfortunately, she did not live to see her efforts to bear fruit when they were finally published, when Deshkova's memoirs were finally published in 1840. The sisters' letters were ultimately gathered into a collection, and you can see the title page there, The Russian Journals of Martha and Catherine Wilmot, and ultimately published initially in 1934. Both of those title pages you can see there are from the copies that we have in our special collections library. As of today, we have approximately 36 titles in the library that pertain just to Princess Deshkova, most of those being in Russian. And we also have more contemporary publications of both of those as well. And if you're really interested, you can go online and find copies of them fairly easily because they're both out of copyright. So if you want to learn more about that, you can talk to me, or you can go and get yourself a copy. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to pass it off to Wilfried.
Thank you, Jason. Good evening, everyone. So here we will be talking about 3 more determined women through this example, this beautiful portrait featuring Grand Duchess Elena Pavlovna by Christina Robertson, and which was part of the collection of Marjorie Poe. So here are our 3 determined women in one works of art. So here we have a beautiful portrait from 1841 featuring one of the very influential women of the 19th century in the Russian Empire, who represents a kind of works that Marjorie Poe was collecting, interested in the stories of this influential woman she was admiring. And I will tell you a little bit more about Elena Pavlovna in a few minutes. But first, I wanted also to show you, and I will tell you a bit more about that, this document from our archives showcasing Marjorie Poe's interest for these works specifically, and giving you an example of how she was sometimes sharing, sometimes in a very short way, her interest in a work of art. So here you have a letter that was written to her from her curator, Marvin Ross, was traveling to Austria, where he located this work, and he knew that Marjorie Poe was looking for works by Christina Robertson, and instead of like what she usually does, writing like yes, no, or okay, here she writes a little bit more, can't wait to see it, so showing some enthusiasm regarding these specific works of art. So let's start with first more information about the author of this work, Christina Robertson. Christina Robertson is actually, unfortunately, an artist who is not very well documented, and there is not much of sources available about her career, but she was born in Scotland in 1796, and it is believed that she was trained as an artist through her family circles, especially her uncle, George Saunders, who was a very successful painter at that time in Great Britain, and who introduced her also to his clientele and his patrons. And that's how she very quickly demonstrated her talent by becoming a very successful portraitist, especially a miniature portraitist, and was even displaying some of her works at the Royal Academy in London in the 1820s. And here is one of her work from 1822 from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, featuring Christina Robertson, a self-portrait in action, as you can see, holding a piece of paper on her left hand and watching carefully, looking at her subject matter, be the portrait that she will be rendering on her piece of paper, as you can see here. And what is really extraordinary about her past is like through her many commissions, she became to make her name around her art, and so receive commissions from influential member of the local aristocracy, but also foreign aristocracy. And she will, as I said, display some of her artwork at the Royal Academy in London, and also will be the first woman becoming an honorary member of the Royal Scottish Academy in 1829, being the first woman member of this academy and one of the first for many decades afterwards. And with this success, she began to travel because of the many patrons she was working for. She would go to France, and from France she will also go to Russia and do many back and forth between Russia and Great Britain. And we just learned from Jason how difficult and dangerous it would be to travel so often at that time. So that tells you also a lot about her extraordinary past going back and forth to Russia. So she was actually, it's not really well known how she was invited to go to St. Petersburg, but it's more or less through some of her clients that she worked for in France, most likely, that her name was then mentioned to the Emperor of Russia, who invited her to come to St. Petersburg. But what's pretty interesting about her art, she was mostly known, as seen through this example, as the miniature painter. So doing portraits, wonderful portraits, but on miniature. But in Russia, she was given the opportunity by the emperor to create those very large-scale portraits. And she was invited to create those series of portraits commissioned by Nikolai I, of member of his family. And those large full-size portraits, full-length portraits, are actually all conserved at the State Hermitage Museum today. In the center, as an example, you have the portrait of the Empress Alexandra Fedorovna, and then two of her daughters on each side. On the left, Alexandra Nikolaevna, and on the right, Olga Nikolaevna. All these three portraits made between 1840 and 1841 when she was in St. Petersburg and creating these wonderful portraits, which for the two on the right are quite in a tradition of formal portraiture, featuring in a very elegant composition the sitters with framed by a very luxurious and lavish drapery, framed by architecture, as you can see. And on the right, for the portrait of Alexandra Nikolaevna, featured in front of a beautiful landscape, also part of the tradition of English portraiture. And also, as you will see, part of her style to be with a lot of delicate and elaborate details, a lot of flowers and details here, which are also typical of the Romantic era of the late 1830s, 1840s. And she would not only portray in this scale member of the imperial family, but she was also commissioned portrait by influential member of the Russian nobility, such as a member of the Yusupov family. And here you have three portraits, again, at the Hermitage from the same period, 1840, 1841. And on the right, for example, a beautiful portrait of Princess Tatiana Yusupov, who is featured here in one of her palaces. On the other side is actually the whole dynasty featured here. On the other side, you have Tatiana's daughter-in-law, Princess Zinaida Ivanovna. And in the center, the heir through the family, Prince Nikolai Borisovich, a son of Zinaid, featured here as Christina Robertson was already often doing, capturing actually what will define the taste of the sitter or their position. And in the center, we see the Prince Nikolai at a young age featured as a musician, and his main love was for music, and he was a talented violinist, as you can see here, standing next to a partition and holding his violin in his hands. So that's for the what made particularly famous and successful Christina Robertson, who was commissioned all these wonderful portraits in Russia. And those portraits, which are still at the Hermitage, some of them hang there in the late 30s when Marjorie Post was en poste in Soviet Russia. She would spend 1.5 year between 37 and 38 in Moscow, but will travel also to Leningrad, visit the Hermitage, where she enjoyed the collection that was featured there. And we know that because when she was able to acquire her first work by Christina Robertson, it was made pretty clear that she was looking for work by Christina Robertson for over 2 decades. So having not seen any works available since she had left Russia. And here we are back to our painting. I was showing it to you, which is in our exhibition currently, featuring this beautiful portrait of Grand Duchess Yelena Pavlovna. Yelena Pavlovna was a member of the imperial family. She was born Princess of Württemberg. She married in 1824 the brother of Emperor Nikolai I. She's featured here in 1841 as she was a patron of the arts. You can see that from the surroundings around her, the beautiful works of art, such as the black cabinet on the back, the crystal vases, the bronze picture on the table, books open on the table, showing her interest in the arts. And at the back on the sofa, you can see the fur, the ermine, which is actually allude to her status as a member of the royal family. But Yelena Pavlovna is mostly known for a very liberal point of views, and 20 years later, in the early 1860s, she will influence her nephew, Emperor Alexander II, to reform the country and especially to abolish serfdom in Russia in the early 1860s. So very determined woman featured on this portrait by a determined artist, Christina Robertson, and collected by our determined woman, Marjorie Post. So when this painting is very well actually documented, so here you can see, which is also quite rare, that it came in the collection with its original frame. So you can see a detail here of this gilt bronze frame. It's also a painting which is it's also very, very rare, a painting that we can see in another painting, believe me, like right behind that red dot here. This is our painting featured in Yelena Pavlovna's husband's study in their palace in St. Petersburg in 1856. And we also know that this painting stayed within the family until the Russian Revolution, until it was sold by the Soviet government and later on acquired by Marjorie Post in Austria in 1961. And what's even also very rare, that among the rare documents that have survived documenting the career of and the past of Christina Robertson, there is her account book listing all of the commissions she received and how much she was paid. And this book is kept at the V&A in London. And when I looked at it, I was so happy to find actually the note from her hand noting how much she received for that commission of our portrait in 1841, in December 1841. So that's a very well documented creation here. And as I said, Marjorie Post couldn't wait to see it when she learned from her curator, Marvin Ross, in 1961. So he was traveling abroad. This was a type of trip that he was doing for research for Marjorie Post. And also when he was antiquing, he will let her know what he was seeing, suggesting new acquisition. She will sometimes just say yes, no, or can't wait to see it. And here among the different actually exchanges that we have found, which is quite rare for our collection, there are like very nice exchanges between different members of the staff of Marjorie Post. And for example, when her social secretary wrote to Marvin Ross about this painting, she said, quote, "First of all, Mrs. Post is always delighted to hear from you and has been so interested in your many cards and messages. She was absolutely thrilled with the acquisition of the Christina Robertson and was delighted to see the little photograph. I have heard her talking about Christina Robertson for nearly 20 years, and this is the first time one has never remotely crossed her path since Russia," end of quote. And then actually Marjorie Post, making a note, can't wait to see it, afterwards will also write to Marvin Ross in the same year and say, quote, "I was so interested to have your letter, and I'm so appreciative for all these fascinating little tidbits that come to me from time to time. I can't wait to see the Christina Robertson portrait, and I'm thrilled at the thought that after all these years, this is to join the collection here at Hillwood," end of quote. So definitely, I'm just a little insisting, but believe me, it's very rare to have such a documentation, and Jason helped me actually find additional letters to document this great story about Marjorie Post acquiring this work by Christina Robertson. And I have to say that when she bought it, it was known that the sitter was a member of the Russian aristocracy, but it's only a few years ago that I was able to identify her as Yelena Pavlovna, which of course adds to the significance of this work. And of course, she would not stop there. And now we have even a second work in our collection by Christina Robertson, which is on view in the exhibition as well. This is a portrait of actually the Emperor Nikolai I, who gave her the chance of creating those wonderful portraits today at the State Hermitage Museum, dating 1840, and which was a very famous portrait. Actually, before it was acquired by Marjorie Post in 1963, it was only known through prints, because this model had been used to create those prints, as you can see on this example on the right. And actually, she bought it in New York in 1963. It's featuring in a very beautiful way the emperor in this composition, like framed by a column and opening on a beautiful landscape, as you can see, showcasing how the talent of the artist. And this painting, actually, we know now, had a great story as well, because it was a piece that was kept by Christina Robertson herself and passed on her heir, and was only sold by her granddaughter in 1940, and then had different owners until Marjorie Post was able to acquire it. And speaks to, of course, Marjorie Post's interest for women artists, but also women designers, as Megan will tell us in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening. So now we are going to join the 20th century and talk about a determined woman in Marjorie Post's collection named Hattie Carnegie. She was a pioneer in the American fashion business during the early 20th century. She adapted her business model to complement the social economic challenges of that decade. And Carnegie opened her first shop in 1909, and by the mid-1940s, she had over 1,000 employees. And in the words of a 1945 Life magazine feature by Robert Maloney, had risen from poverty to becoming the absolute boss of a $6.5 million dress business. We will talk tonight about how she did it and highlight two of the extant Hattie Carnegie pieces in Hillwood's collection today, while underscoring a couple other wonderful Carnegie connections. So, a little bit of background. Hattie Carnegie was born Henrietta Cannon-Geiser to a Jewish family in Vienna in 1886, although she sometimes bumped that up a few years. She also adapted the last name of Carnegie when she first struck out on her own independent enterprise, setting her ambitions high by choosing the last name of the renowned late 19th, early 20th century businessman Andrew Carnegie. She was the second oldest of 7 siblings, and she immigrated to this country in 1900. And the sudden death of her father left the family in poverty, which then led Hattie, as the second eldest, to become a messenger for Macy's department store. And she also took on some unskilled work at a wholesale dress designer in New York City. There's an anecdote about this early exposure to the fashion industry that I'd like to share. She was overheard criticizing a wholesale designer's creation. It was a black beaded evening dress from the 1900s. She was remarking that it would look better with a white collar and cuffs, which is not really in fashion during that time period. The designer, he thought that idea was ridiculous, so out of spite, he decided to add those elements to the design. And of course, it sold fabulously. So Carnegie's first enterprise was a partnership with her neighborhood seamstress. They attracted many social clientele by word of mouth. She would buy that partner out after World War II, and she moved the business to the Upper West Side at 42 East 49th Street in 1925, and that building took up a full city block. By the peak of her career, this retail and custom shop only represented about a third of her income. But she began by importing French couture designs that included Vianney, Schiaparelli, Lanvin, Chanel, Patou, Mambuchet, and Molyneux. Hattie Carnegie would travel to Paris 7 times a year, beginning in 1919 up until the occupation. She would pack 125 French couture designs into her suitcase, and she credits herself as discovering Madeleine Vianney by chasing a fellow luncheon patron at the Ritz in Paris down to the bathroom to ask her which designer she was wearing. I'd love to point out this University of North Texas costume collection piece from the 1930s. You'll note that they include an image of her label. So Carnegie was clearly looking to the work of Madeleine Vianney when she included her own thumbprint on the label to kind of trademark the work. If I haven't said this or made it clear, Carnegie herself was not a designer, but she was a businesswoman and was able to know what was in trend. So much so that at these shows in Paris, other members of the fashion industry would watch her reactions to shows as designs came through the salons. So her big in-house statement, what she changed the face of American fashion with, was these neat little suits, again represented by this design that you see from the University of North Texas's costume collection. Carnegie recruited some really stellar in-house designers during the early 20th century. These included Norman Norell, Pauline Tregear, Anne Lowe, and Claire McCardle. So all of these, she had an incredible eye for talent. Moving on to the next slide. Also on offer at this large East 49th Street department store that she had with her custom shop was costume jewelry. Chocolate bonbons. Apparently, she had a really good recipe from going back and forth to Paris all those times. If anyone finds her chocolate bonbon recipe, I'd love to find it. I was determined, but couldn't find it. She sold cosmetics, antiques, bags, slips, bed jackets, sweaters, blouses, slacks, perfume, scarves, as well as dresses and hats. You can see here her perfume line. The flacons are stylized busts of herself. The antiques that were on offer were overflow from her own houses. She wore all of her designs and was her best kind of representative and spokesperson. Her wholesale line of hats was cleverly named Hatnegie. A little bit now about that national wholesale line that I mentioned at the top that made her a millionaire. She established that line in 1934. She had a team of designers working under her supervision, producing 4 seasons of models that included about 100 to 150 designs each season. And the wholesale prices range from $49.75 to $125, with a retail markup of about 60%. Her second wholesale line was kind of unironically called Spectator Sports. That was the least trouble for her. She had one designer work for it, and that one earned her quite a bit of income as well. And she had a separate address for her wholesale outlets at 711 Fifth Avenue. Of course, the 2 gowns in Hillwood's collection today are from the import custom shop, not the wholesale line. The import custom shop was located on the 2nd floor of that East 49th Street shop, and during the 1940s, you could expect to pay beginning at $195 for a piece, upwards then, of course. Like in Parisian ateliers, you would be assigned your own salesperson to work with. Depending on the frequency of your orders, you would have a dress form made of your own measurements. In that same Life magazine 1945 publication that I quoted at the top, here's another quote about having your own dress form at Carnegie. To rate your own dummy at Hattie Carnegie is probably the financial equivalent of supporting a racehorse. Carnegie had daily 3 p.m. showings of her designs from the custom shop. Clients could choose color, fabrics, etc. before custom fittings. You could also, if you were too busy, order via mail and telegram. You would express what you needed and telegram the shop. They would pull a few sketches, send them off to you. You could telegram back and say what you wanted. And in about 2 weeks, you would get your order, so quite expedient. Our gown you see here is an early example of a belt seen in women's evening attire, and I do believe this was worn by Marjorie Merriweather Post. So wearing the belt instead of a more feminine silk sash, although it does have the beautiful lace with the ruched net insertions throughout, and of course the capelet. You can see this in our gallery in the Determined Women exhibition. The hem of the gown is internally faced with horsehair to add structure, and the entire gown is lined in a pale blue silk crepe that you see in my image of the label for you here on that slide. Our second gown in the collection is far more delicate at the moment. This is a full cream silk satin evening gown with a green hydrangea corsage. There's also a row of coordinating green tulle peeking out from the hem that you could just see as the wearer walked. And we recently discovered a undated photograph, actually in the collection of the Jerome Zerb photographs. He was a society photographer at the Yale University Beneke Library. And so in that photo, you actually see Marjorie Post wearing not this gown, but she is wearing her Marie Antoinette earrings and her Anna tiara. At the middle is her husband, Joe Davies, in white tie. And then on the left, you see Eleanor Tidings Dizen, who is Davies' oldest daughter. And I believe she is wearing this very gown in that photo. Although, of course, we don't know the date, the occasion at which they're ascending this grand staircase. Based on Marjorie Post's hairstyle, I would say this was in the 1940s, so probably taken in the US. We have an earlier scrapbook image, thank you, Jason and Kendall, of Eleanor Tidings wearing a very scarily similar dress, although Marjorie Post annotates that this is her new, you can see it on the right, pale blue silk satin dress. So perhaps she had a copy made, but you see the corsage, you see the gathering at the straps, the fullness of the skirt, all are on display here at this instance. And these scrapbook photos date to the late 30s when Marjorie Post and Joseph Davies were in Belgium for his ambassadorship there. So the fun with Hattie Carnegie and the Post family doesn't stop here. These are photos of Dina Merrill on the left at her 1941 quiet wartime debutante party held at Hillwood, Long Island. She's actually wearing, we know from notes, a Hattie Carnegie gown trimmed with sequins and ostrich feathers. And we have this portrait in our collection today where the straps were painted out, interestingly. So finally, I would like to close by saying that Hattie Carnegie's business did survive the war in the 1940s because she partnered with Life magazine for home sewing patterns. She chose U.S.-made textiles from manufacturers who were not supplying the war efforts for her. And also she had her aforementioned wholesale garment empire. She enjoyed really great publicity during the 1940s, including the Vogue cover that you see on this slide here, featuring actually Dina Merrill wearing Hattie Carnegie. And that photo was by John Rawlings. And then, of course, the sad part is that Hattie Carnegie passed away in 1956. She was once quoted saying, "No one is indispensable but me." And her shops closed by 1965. A few years before the shops closed, Merrill again loaned her celebrity and drawing skills to the Carnegie perfume line. And you can see the Carnegie Pink advertisement with the note that Dina Merrill drew it for you. We remember Carnegie for her tenacity as a successful American business person here at Hillwood and beyond. Thank you so much, and I would love to invite my colleagues up because I think it's time for Q&A.
Thank you so much again to Jason, Wilfried, and Megan for an amazing presentation. We'll now take some questions both from Zoom and the audience. My name's Katie, and I will be serving as the voice of the Zoom audience. You'll see over there my colleague Alex. She has a microphone. For the sake of everyone who is watching at home, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Alex will bring you the microphone. Speak your question into the microphone, and then Jason, Wilfried, or Megan will answer for you. Actually, we do have one question from Zoom to get us started. This is for Megan. Someone would like to know what stores carried Carnegie's clothing as, quote, off the rack, unquote.
She had a nationwide presence. So I think Neiman Marcus, for sure, because she won the Neiman Marcus Award in 1939 is one example. But she did work with smaller local department stores. She had a presence in Minnesota, all across the country, different large department stores. So there's many examples. Of course.
Katie, we have a question up here in the second row. I'm going to pass the mic.
Thank you very much. It's been a delightful presentation. We have many determined women in the collection, and I hope you don't mind if I ask about one that is not in the exhibit, and that is the Duchess of Chateauroux. This is for Wilfried, and whose bust is in the entry hall. I think she's a fascinating character, and I haven't read the book about all of her and sisters and the competition there, but they make great stories, I think. Thank you.
So I don't know. I don't know if there. I mean, yes. It's one of the many determined women we have in the collection, and I would like to say yes. I mean, this exhibition is just a series of highlights, and it speaks about the core of the collection. And when you start looking deeply into the collection, you understand how many actually women are represented, and the Duchess of Chateauroux is one of them, but there was not enough space for all of them. So, and I have to say I didn't study that piece specifically, so maybe we keep it for a future, project or research.
Any more questions from the audience at the moment?
I would also say, to follow up on what Wilfried said, we had a hard time keeping it to 4 for tonight, as you can see. So it's not as though we're starved for choices, and that's the really wonderful thing to be able to say.
I have one here in the middle. Let me head this way.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. Just a question about Carnegie. Did she have a family? Did she ever marry or have children?
That's a great question. She was married, but she was still professionally known as Hattie Carnegie. So her husband didn't take he wasn't very involved with her business. I think it was all her. As for children, I'm not sure.
Any more questions from the audience or Zoom in the back?
We don't have any Zoom questions right now, so
I've got one
audience
up in
questions
the
are
front
ready.
here.
Megan, that beautiful Hattie Carnegie cream-colored dress there that you featured, and you said it's in our collection.
It is.
Has it ever been on display?
I believe it has, and I would love to say and share that I will hope to have it on display soon, because I have some wonderful projects that I think it will align with, and I think it would also be fabulous if we could find out more about the occasion for which it was worn now that we have some documentation. So yeah, please stay tuned to Hattie Carnegie.
Any more questions? I see one in the audience. Let me just go across the front here. Excuse me. I was absolutely intrigued that those portraits, the miniature portraits, were painted on with watercolor onto ivory. Can you say more about whether that was traditional at the time, or was she unique in that approach? Thank you.
All right. So yes, for miniature portraiture, it's very often on ivory because of the watercolor that is translucent, and the white of the ivory create like the specific finish that was very appreciated for like this detailed, exquisite, painting on ivory. So, and which is quite amazing about the piece I focused on by Christina Robertson is the size of it. I mean, it's a miniature, but it's a quite large one. So it speaks about the, size of the, ivory that was used to create this work. And so, yes, it was traditional miniature painting, and it's a tradition that Marjorie Post admired, miniature painting on ivory. And for herself, portrait of herself or member of her family, she was continuing this tradition into the 20th century. And actually in the exhibition you have a selection of many of the miniature paintings that she commissioned, and many of them actually painted by women who was continuing the same tradition and that she was working with.
Thank you. All right, any more?
We have a question from Zoom. Someone would like to know if women artists and painters would have commanded smaller payments for their work.
Smaller payments for their work.
Oh, I have to say that's a very good question. I don't know. So it will be a very interesting way to compare, yes, and find out. But yeah, probably, yeah.
And Katie, we have a question here from the audience.
I was wondering, there are a few objects in the exhibit that were new acquisitions, and I wonder what your guiding principles are for adding to the collection.
Oh, great. That's a great question. So regarding our acquisitions policy, so it's not our main mission to add objects to the collection. So our main criteria for acquisitions are either objects that once were part of the collection or like really strongly related to our founder Marjorie Post, and then we are also expanding part of the strength of the collection, and also continuing like some of Marjorie Post's interests, and regarding two of the recent acquisitions featured in the exhibition. And I'm sure you are referring to The Crown by Christine Mays and the wonderful vase by Roberto Lugo featuring contemporary, influential women. These are like just a way to continue Marjorie Post's, vision, and by acquiring works by either women or featuring or related to influential women of nowadays.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this final question will come from Zoom. Someone would like to know if there are any other works by Christina Robertson in museums or collections in the United States.
That's a very good question, and I'm not so sure, but I know they are very rare, so not many, but I don't have a full list of her works, but most of her works are actually kept in European collection, especially in Great Britain, and also, of course, as you imagine, in today Russia, because of the large commission she received from the court.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause for our amazing speakers tonight. Be sure to join everyone out in the lobby for a book signing. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.